Number 30,
43%.
the Israel-Hamas War. The
21,
Israeli-Palestinian
yeah.
conflict has been ongoing for 3/4 of a century, with the 2023 Israel-Hamas war adding another tragic and bloody chapter.
There are so many families across Israel asking, where was the army? Why didn't they stop this? What do you tell those families?
I tell them it's the responsibility of the army. It's the responsibility of the army for the intelligence. It's our responsibility to guard the people of Israel. We failed on Saturday. This is our responsibility. But now we're fighting.
This latest conflict began when the Palestinian political and militant group Hamas launched a surprise attack on the 7th of October 2023, killing around 1,200 Israelis, mostly civilians.
Wow.
They also took 250 Israelis hostage, demanding the release of Palestinian prisoners.
This is a massive terrorist attack.
Decontaminate.
Gunning down Israeli civilians in their towns, in their homes, and as we've seen so graphically, literally dragging people across the border with Gaza.
In retaliation, Israel dropped 6,000 bombs on Gaza over 6 days and launched a ground invasion. Over 20,000 Palestinians have been killed, mostly civilians, including more than 8,000 children. There have been widespread global protests, and Gaza has collapsed into a humanitarian crisis. Number 29.
I'm trying to
Tiananmen Square protests and massacres.
sabotage
In China, references to this event, also known as the June 4th incident, are heavily censored. In the spring of 1989, student-led demonstrations were held in Tiananmen Square, Beijing, calling for democracy and greater civil liberties.
They turned Tiananmen Square, the country's symbol of sovereignty, into a hub of dissent and protest. They want to crack down on corruption. They want freedom of press. They call for an awakening to reform and progress in China.
The protests spread to hundreds of cities, with workers joining them, angry over inflation, corruption, and the erosion of welfare. Declaring martial law, the government sent soldiers and tanks into the square. The death toll is disputed, ranging from hundreds to thousands.
Estimates run from several hundred to over 10,000. Some argue that by shooting at civilians, the Communist Party lost its legitimacy to rule, and with it, an opportunity for political modernization.
Famously, at least outside of China, the photo of an unknown man facing off against a column of tanks has become an enduring symbol of the event. Today, public displays of mourning for the victims are banned, although commemorations still sometimes reportedly occur in secret. Number 28, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Also known as the BP oil spill, this unfortunately wasn't the first industrial disaster to devastate our marine habitats, but it remains the largest on record. It began on April 20th due to an explosion on the Deepwater Horizon oil platform.
And there's 30,000 of these workers every day that go out in the Gulf to do this work, and they're well trained, and they work to try to not have these accidents. But on this day, something went wrong, and now we're working with BP and with Transocean to try to find the cause.
The fallout from this disaster resulted in 205 million gallons of oil discharged into the Gulf of Mexico, and effects were still being felt years after the initial disaster.
Birds are still on these islands coming in here feeding. So you can just imagine the contamination that takes place within the wildlife.
In fact, reports from 2012 stated that the oil refineries from Deepwater Horizon were still leaking, despite an official statement from 2010 that claimed the well was sealed. Number 27, the Oklahoma City bombing. This domestic terrorist attack shocked the nation. On April 19, 1995, anti-government white supremacists Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols detonated a truck full of explosives in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. In a blink, the sky dark with a plume of deep black smoke.
There was a tremendous explosion, a massive explosion at the federal building in the center of the city, the A.P. Murrah building.
We have a large column of smoke to the south of this address. Are you going to check on that?
The explosion killed 168 people and injured 680 others. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was left in ruins, and the force of the blast damaged cars and buildings over a dozen blocks away. McVeigh and Nichols had sought to spark a revolution.
McVeigh became disaffected, latching onto a growing pro-gun, anti-government ideology that gained traction in the 1990s in the aftermath of federal law enforcement actions at Ruby Ridge, Idaho.
To this day, it is the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in United States history. Number 26, the Iran hostage crisis. In 1953, British and American intelligence agencies orchestrated a coup against democratically elected Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, who had nationalized Iran's oil industry. With U.S. support, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi became Iran's true ruler.
The Shah's power is maintained by a vicious secret police and the fifth largest military on Earth, equipped with American weapons.
Fast forward to the Islamic Revolution of 1979, and the Shah, seen as a Western puppet, was overthrown, replaced with the theocratic government of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. In the middle of this revolution, militarized college students took 52 Americans hostage in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. For over a year, President Jimmy Carter sought to negotiate their return, but only after 444 days were they released, after a pledge from the U.S. not to intervene in Iranian affairs.
It was a long and harrowing ordeal for the hostages, their families, and indeed the entire nation. And it was an ordeal that plagued the presidency of Jimmy Carter, an ordeal whose final resolution eluded his presidency by less than an hour.
Number 25, the November 2015 Paris attacks. In January 2015, France was left reeling from an Islamic terrorist attack on satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, in which 12 staff were killed.
The attack on Charlie Hebdo last week was Al-Qaeda's most high-profile operation in years. And today, they bragged about it. In a video, Al-Qaeda in Yemen claimed it targeted the magazine for insulting the Prophet Muhammad.
Several other smaller attacks occurred throughout the year. On November 13th, these culminated in by far the deadliest. That night, in a series of coordinated attacks, terrorists detonated explosive vests and opened fire in streets and public venues in Paris.
Only minutes later, gunmen opened fire on several bars and restaurants in eastern Paris.
3 gunmen stormed a concert at the Bataclan Theater, killing 90 people. In all, 130 lives were taken. The attacks sent shockwaves not only through France, but also reverberated around the world. Number 24, John Lennon is assassinated. It's safe to say that John Lennon is one of the most influential singer-songwriters of all time. Even after leaving the Beatles in 1969, he enjoyed enormous popularity and success. He also became well known for his activism.
There's not a more positive way of demonstrating in favor of peace than sitting in bed with free square
However, on December 8, 1980, obsessive fan Mark David Chapman fatally shot him outside the Dakota Apartments in New York City. When news broke on ABC's Monday Night Football, fans were shocked and horrified. For many, the world seemed to stop turning.
An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous perhaps of all of the Beatles, shot twice in the back.
Around the globe, fans were united in mourning for a man whose music meant so much to so many. Number 23, Hurricane Katrina. This Category 5 hurricane was devastating not only due to its intensity, but also a failure of flood control systems and slow government response. On August 29, 2005, the hurricane made landfall in Louisiana.
It was quickly predicted to become a catastrophic event.
My fear is absolutely that the models are correct.
It is gaining strength again. It is now stalking the Gulf Coast.
It rapidly doubled in size and intensified into a Category 5 hurricane.
The storm surge breached New Orleans levees and flooded the city.
Oh no, it's
Tens
full.
of thousands of residents had not evacuated. It didn't matter if you were from there. TV and radio audiences could feel the distress and panic in the air. Critics argued that race and class were factors in the slow local and federal response.
This story ends up being the roadmap, the instruction booklet, the how-to story of dealing with disaster. It also tells you what not to do.
The hurricane left an estimated 1,392 dead in its wake, making it one of the deadliest in U.S. history. Number 22, the Fall of Saigon. Seeing photos of the Fall of Saigon, you might be reminded of the more recent 2021 Kabul airlift in Afghanistan. Both involved scenes of panic and powerful images of last-minute evacuation.
The hardest part was the waiting. Many people said it was unnerving to be waiting for a ride to safety and to be hearing fighting all around you.
On April 30th, 1975, North Vietnamese forces captured Saigon, the capital of South Vietnam. marking the end of the
Crewmate,
deadly and
there are
divisive
imposters
Vietnam War.
among us.
The iconic photo of a helicopter
toss off the
evacuation from the
game.
roof of the U.S. Embassy symbolized the desperate and dramatic nature of the fall.
Yes, we've chosen to leave, but we've chosen to leave because it's no longer defendable with the resources that we have chosen to commit. And the limits that we have put on our involvement in South Korea.
Frick!
In the aftermath,
Too
Vietnam
much.
was reunified
Oh
under
no!
communist
Oh
rule,
no!
and
Oh
the
no!
U.S.
This
began to
is
significantly
gonna be.
rethink its
This
foreign
is a
policies.
crisis.
Number 21.
No!
Founded in Indiana in 1954, Jim Jones's
I
People's
got
Temple preached a message
killed.
nominally based on Christianity, socialism, and civil rights.
His driving force was less the Bible than social justice. He was
know, I
very
can't
much
fix the
ahead of the
sabotage, 'cause
current
I'm dead.
climate in terms of race relations and his desire to create an integrated
I
society.
can't play
But
because
something
I'm
very
dead.
dark lurked under the surface. In the 1970s, Jones fled accusations of abuse and fake miracles to a remote settlement in Guyana. Over time, the charismatic leader became paranoid and obsessed with domination over his faithful. Further reports of abuse led to a fact-finding mission from U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan, who never returned, murdered by Jones's Red Brigade. Jones ordered his over 900 followers, a third of the miners, to take their own lives by drinking Flavor Aid laced with cyanide.
This time, Jones served a punch spiked with cyanide. More than 900 died.
The tragedy left the public in shock and horror, and is the origin of the expression drinking the Kool-Aid. Number 20,
Faint noted.
Nelson
Love me
Mandela
this time,
released.
baby.
In 1964, South African
Now we got
revolutionary
Full
leader
House.
Nelson Mandela was sentenced
A
to
Full
life
House.
imprisonment. For
Full
years,
House.
he had fought against apartheid, the system of racial segregation that privileged the country's white population and disenfranchised people of color. Even
anyways.
from prison, he
I'm
remained
ready.
committed to this cause, communicating
I'm
with
ready.
political leaders and gaining worldwide
I'm
attention.
ready.
The fact that you could
Yay!
sit
This house is a
alone
full house again.
and
Woohoo!
gave us a wonderful
10
opportunity
free AM.
to change ourselves, your behavior.
As civil unrest grew, Mandela was finally released from prison in 1990, 27
Crewmate,
years
do your
after he was
task.
sentenced.
Okay.
His release was broadcast around the world.
Heroic sacrifices have made it possible for me to be here today.
In a historic
submit
speech,
scan.
he affirmed his commitment to peace, but also to the ongoing struggle against the violence of apartheid. Just 4 years later, he would go on to become the country's first black president. Number 19, the 2021 United States Capitol attack. On January 6, 2021, scenes of carnage in the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C., shocked Americans watching the riot unfold on TV. At a rally before the attack, outgoing President Donald Trump told supporters the election had been stolen and urged them to march to the Capitol building.
White.
Debunked by courts, state audits, and federal agencies, this claim was part of a campaign to overturn the election results and reinstal Trump as president.
This was a fraudulent election.
Bye-bye, white. You got 4 legs.
Within hours, 2,000 angry Trump supporters broke into the Capitol building, assaulting police and searching for lawmakers gathered to formalize Joe Biden's victory. Among them were members of far-right militias and neo-fascist groups.
Oh,
Some of them
yeah.
armed. The insurrection failed, with lawmakers racing to safety before the mob reached them. Number 18, the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. There were a lot of eyes on Cape Canaveral, Florida when Challenger finally launched on January 28, 1986. Due to technical issues and bad weather, the flight had been delayed multiple times.
Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
On launch
No.
day,
Anyone
CNN broadcast live
touch
nationwide
left.
coverage. NASA had
Yeah.
organized for children to watch from schools to promote their Teacher in
this
Space project,
sounds like-
which had added teacher-turned-astronaut Krista McAuliffe to the crew. But viewers' hopes turned to horror as the shuttle disintegrated during its ascent, claiming the lives of all 7 crew members.
We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded.
The Challenger's final
Fighting
flight had
Pavel.
lasted only 73 seconds.
I'm
Number
fighting
17,
Pavel.
the 1972 Summer Olympics. The 1972 Olympic Games in West Germany were the first to be held in the region since Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler used the event as a platform for propaganda in 1936. Sadly, the September Games would become even more infamous, etching out their own bleak mark in history.
Bye-bye, Papu!
8
You're
armed
so
men
ejected!
terrorist group Black
With
September
the
killed 2 Israeli Olympic team members and took 9 more hostage.
The terrorists want hundreds of Palestinian prisoners released from Israeli jails. Nothing else will do.
After 2 grueling days of negotiation, the hostage crisis was brought to a violent end. The rescue attempt was botched, claiming the lives of all hostages and a police officer. Number 16, the O.J. Simpson murder trial verdict.
It was all done!
A century, and the verdict left the public reeling.
Remember these words. If it doesn't fit,
Oh no.
you
Someone
must.
dimmed all the lights.
After Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman were stabbed to death in June 1994,
Oh, no.
Brown's ex-husband, former footballer and actor O.J. Simpson,
I ain't gonna
became the
watch that.
prime suspect. Before her death, Brown had said that Simpson had abused and threatened
Skirty.
her. Every aspect of the case was highly publicized, from the car chase that saw him arrested to the lengthy trial. The coverage hooked viewers, and everyone had an opinion.
Nope.
On October 3rd, 1995, the jury returned a
My name is
verdict
about
of
to get-
not guilty.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant or
and
J.
then
Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder.
For some, it was a vindication. To others, a travesty of justice, in which a celebrity had gotten away with murder. Number 15, the death of Osama bin Laden. In the wake of the September 11th attacks in 2001, U.S. President George W. Bush announced the beginning of a war on terror. The first stage of this war was the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan to hunt down Osama bin Laden and his terrorist group, Al-Qaeda.
In this conflict, America faces an enemy who has no regard for conventions of war or rules of morality.
This man who continued for decades
There
as bin
you
Laden's
got
base
violent!
However,
You're
in
dumb
2001,
lord!
the CIA tracked him down to a compound in Pakistan. In a helicopter raid codenamed Operation Neptune Spear on May 2nd, bin Laden was killed.
After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden and took custody of his body.
For this, the events of 9/11, President Obama's announcement
We
that the Al-Qaeda
ignore
leader
the
was dead
imposters!
was a landmark event. Number 14, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. For months, the buildup of Russian forces along Ukraine's border had the world on edge. Would Russian President Vladimir Putin really give the order to invade? In 2014, Ukrainians had revolted against a pro-Moscow government, sick of corruption and abuse of power. Their success led Russia to annex Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. In February 2022, Putin launched a full-scale